Okay, this is the last section in Chapter 1, 1.3, Studying Life. So think about it. There's a lot of things going on in the world that have to do with biology. The bird flu. Also, there's information about illegal drugs, that people who take illegal drugs might have or do have permanent damage to their brains and nervous systems. There's also talk about cloning human cells. These type of things were brought up in class when we were talking about why do you need to learn about science. Now remember that the Greek word bio means life and logi means study of. So since biology is a study of life, exactly what is life? How do you know if something is living? Do you say because it can breathe, because it can walk, because it can reproduce? Sure, those are all characteristics of living things, but they also are based on quite a few other things that you may not even think about. The reason why we have to say that something that's living has to have all these characteristics because there are certain organisms, or not necessarily organisms, but certain things that have some of the traits that living organisms have. An example would be viruses. Even though we say you can kill a virus, viruses technically are not considered living because they don't have all the characteristics of living things. So one thing that all living things have is they have DNA. Living things are based on a universal genetic code. And this code is where they store information that allows them to make what are called proteins. And these proteins produce all different types of molecules in your body. And they also control the reactions that happen in your body. This information, or this universal genetic code, or this DNA, is copied and passed from parent to offspring during reproduction. Another characteristic of living things is that living things grow and develop. So you have a single egg, it divides again and again, and eventually these cells will differentiate, or they change, so that different cells have different jobs to do in the body. So for instance, you might have cells that start off one way, and those could be called stem cells. Those are cells that are undifferentiated. And then they will differentiate, or they'll change. So a stem cell could change into a nerve cell, could change into a heart cell, and other cells. Living things respond to their environment. So by having a response, there has to be a stimulus. So a stimulus is something that causes an organism to respond. So for instance, if you smell something good and you're hungry, your mouth might start to water. That could be considered a stimulus and response. If you touch something hot, that would be the stimulus. Your response would be to move your hand back very quickly. Another characteristic is that living things reproduce, which means that they make more organisms just like themselves. We have what's called sexual reproduction, and that's when you have two different parents, and they make a completely different organism. When I say completely different, I mean the DNA would be like a mixture of both parents. Then you have what is called asexual. And asexual reproduction is not sex with when an organism has sex with itself. Basically what it is you have an organism that's able to produce offspring that are identical to itself. So you might have a bacteria that just splits in two, and those two bacteria are exactly like the parent bacteria was. Another thing that living things can do is they maintain what's called homeostasis. And homeostasis is when all of the inside of a person, or the inside of an organism, all the conditions are kept the same. So in other words, when you shiver because you're cold, and shivering causes your body to heat up, so that increases the body temperature. You have specialized cells in leaves, or plants have specialized cells, and these cells regulate the gases that enter and leave a plant. So they help to perform homeostasis in a plant. Another characteristic of living things is that they use energy. This energy is used through what's called metabolism. And metabolism is all the chemical reactions that happen in an organism. So an example of metabolism could be photosynthesis. Another example could be cellular respiration. Now, when we talk about metabolism, we have what is called catabolism and anabolism. Catabolism would be a reaction that breaks molecules down, breaks them into smaller molecules. And then anabolism would be reactions that make bigger molecules. Another one of the characteristics is that living things are made of one or more cells. So that's the smallest functional unit. And when I say functional unit, that's the cell is the smallest piece or the smallest unit that can still carry on life activities. Here on the picture is a picture of an amoeba. That would be a single-celled organism. A paramecium would be a single-celled organism. And humans would be considered multicellular organisms. Another characteristic of living things is that they can evolve or change over time. So they have what are called adaptations, and these adaptations allow the organism to survive a little better. And so for instance, say if we're talking about giraffes, you have a giraffe who is born and it has a little bit longer neck than the previous giraffe. So therefore, this giraffe can eat at the tops of the trees. And because he can eat at the top of the trees, he gets more food than the giraffes who can't eat at the top of the trees. If he gets more food, he has a better chance of survival. If he has a better chance of survival, he has a better chance of reproducing. And then when he reproduces, he passes on those genes that caused him to have a long neck or allowed him to have a long neck. Now, one thing with living things, they've found evidence that shares the history of all living things. And it could be from physical features, or it could even be the information in the DNA. Later on, when we talk about DNA or when we're studying DNA, you'll see that many organisms have very, very similar DNA. For instance, there are 4 different bases that are found in DNA, and all living organisms have those 4, just maybe in different combinations. So let's review the characteristics of living things. First of all, they're all made up of these units that are called cells. They all contain this universal genetic code called DNA. They all have metabolism, which means that they obtain and use materials and energy. They can grow and develop. They can reproduce. They respond to their environment. They know how to maintain or have a way to maintain homeostasis. And they can change over time. Now, when we talk about biology, there's a lot of ideas that biology covers, or a lot of areas that biology covers. First of all, one of the big ideas in biology is that cells are the basis of life. So there are people that just study that. They just study cells. Biology also covers information and heredity. So what do you think I'm talking about when I say information and heredity? That's right, I'm talking about DNA. They study matter and energy growth, development, reproduction. They look at homeostasis. We look at evolution, structure, and function. And then we also look at unity and just the diversity of life. And then how all of these living things are related in nature. And the last idea is that biology is a science, as we know, and we know that science is a way of knowing. So when you're looking at the fields in biology, there's quite a few different fields in biology. And these fields might study life from a different point of view, or anywhere from looking at molecules or looking at the whole planet. Some examples are zoology, and that's the study of the animal kingdom. Paleontology, so that's for people who feel like dinosaurs and fossils and things like that. Paleontology is a pretty interesting area. We study of, of prehistoric life. One of the newer fields now is called genomics and molecular biology. That has to kind of do with genetics and DNA. To change the subject a little bit, when we're doing biological investigations, we have to use the metric system. So why is the metric system important, especially in science? Some of you might say it's the universal language, or because scientists in other countries, if we send them data, we have to use a form of measurement that everybody understands. But that scientific measurement is important in collecting data, performing the experiments. The metric system is pretty easy to use because it's all scaled on multiples of 10. And for the most part, everybody can multiply and divide by 10. It's pretty easy. So here are the common metric units. So for length, we're usually talking about meters. In mass, we're talking about kilograms. For volume, we're talking about liters, and that's usually for liquid volume. What do we use if we're talking about a solid volume? If we can't do the length times width times height, that's when you'd have to use the water displacement method, and your units usually come out probably in centimeters cubed. And if you can do 1 milliliter, you should know that 1 milliliter is equal to 1 centimeter cubed, and it's a direct translation there. Temperature, we like to use Celsius in biology. On the chart here, I've given you that freezing point is 0 degrees Celsius and boiling point is 100 degrees Celsius. Do you know what body temperature is in Celsius? If you'd like, you can stop the video here or stop the PowerPoint here, and you can click on this link, and there's a pretty good review on how to do metric conversions. I'll go over it a little bit in class, but this really is a skill that you should already have. So what are the basic units in scientific measurement? Hope you remember meters, liters, and grams. So if scientists in Alaska wanted to measure the mass of a polar bear, what unit would they use? Now think about it. A polar bear is really big. Another thing you should worry about, or you need to pay attention to, is safety in the lab. That's why it's important to read over the lab first and see what safety precautions are necessary. And at the end of the lab, it's important that you wash your hands. At the end of the lab, during the lab, make sure you wear appropriate gear. So if you need to wear goggles, that you do wear them. And I don't mean just sitting on the top of your head, that you do wear them. Because remember, you're responsible for your own safety and my safety and your classmates' safety. So the main rule, or the single most important safety rule to follow in lab, is to always follow the teacher's instructions. So if you don't know, you should ask.